I'm almost part of sort of one.
Almost. I didn't actually realize. I knew that there was this north-south, or far north Queensland and Queensland considered themselves two entirely different nations. I didn't realise that the same sort of fight was going on with central Queensland and the rest of it.
Right.
Oh, look, it happens everywhere.
We're after our unique identity.
Well, see, Victoria doesn't quite have. I mean, we do identify as separate regions, but we don't passionately defend ourselves.
Well, even to extent like, because I've worked in Mount Isa and I've worked in Charleville, and sorry, they are worlds apart.
Wow.
About the only thing that wasn't unusual or different between the two of them was, sorry, I am a female trying to do a male job. Sorry.
Oh, you got that in both places?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, look, in Charleville.
I've never done that.
In southwest Queensland.
Surprise.
Just love a little delay there.
Yeah, I was getting ready for my next story. Sorry, I was ready for my next story. Because in Miles, I had a local publican come up to me. You have trouble. You just let me. I've had a lot of experience working in Western Queensland. Now, he was a German immigrant who'd been in Australia for 3 years. I'd been working by that stage in Western Queensland, Northwest Queensland, and tribal New Guinea for 15 years. I know you can do it. I won't react quite the way I'm going to. I could.
I lived in Darwin, and my best friend up there was the ex-publican who owned the Tennant Creek pub. he had 5 shirts, and he had the one he got on, the one he'd taken off the day before was ripped and had blood on it. And all the others were in progress towards being recycled to be worn again.
That was a bit like our wardrobe in New Guinea. I turned up because I went from Mount Isa to Backlocks, New Guinea. And, I was in jeans, t-shirt, short little skirt. I've got figure for it or anything, but that was it. Well, I can remember walking around the school in New Guinea in a sort of t-shirt type dress that came to about mid-thigh. They said were quite reasonable. And getting the talk afterwards.
That's right.
So for 3 years, all I had with me basically was a couple of dresses which were obviously deemed inappropriate and jeans.
Oh.
And I was like, you don't wear that. Okay, so what do I wear? I have this absolute wardrobe full of lablets.
Wow. Yeah.
And I know how to wear them, so they don't
They're called movement.
Yeah.
Wow. So how long till you start?
3:30. I'm just
Right,
here
so
to
I'm
sort of...
going to pass it to
Yeah.
Well, Pat's outside the door.
I'm going to scoot and go.
See, I'm just here to go. I feel like I've got to be doing something with my hands.
Yeah. Oh, you got to know that it
Anything.
works.
Oh, it works.
Yeah.
If it doesn't, I can draw a reasonable section on it. I did a presentation on Generate at a teachers' conference, eDemocracy stuff.
Right.
And I was on day 3, and right through the whole time, nobody's technology worked. And I was last session day 3, and I thought, right, well, I better learn how to draw the website awfully quickly. Because I was totally reliant on the internet, because I was going to walk all these features through our website.
Peter Warren print some hard copy. So I used the whole of an HP colour cartridge.
I didn't. I sort of went to print. I just printed mine out, and then
You're on for this block as well?
I'm last week for cocktails. I don't anticipate many questions.
We're getting cocktails?
Well, it's just at the Victoria, I don't know, there's a Victorian local government networking event, and we weren't sure, and so Damien and I were thinking, well, quickly can we run over there and find a good pub? Down a few beers.
I'm actually moving house tonight. So what are we doing tomorrow?
Well, I'm flying out tomorrow straight after.
Oh, really?
I'm going from here straight out to the airport to hang around the airport for a little while.
Fun.
Well, I convinced them that I wasn't leaving my home at 4 o'clock this morning.
And
Yeah,
the point Looking for
It's nice to Kerrie, and she'll let you look at her.
For accommodation.
Which one's yours?
PM. Excellent.
Don't write that one there.
Why do you think,
It's
why do you think I'm flying virgin?
Kerrie's top and mine on that one.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating piece of technology, isn't it?
Nobody touched that.
I use
It
it.
looks like a touch screen.
Yeah. It is touch screen.
See, that's one of the advantages of working for the Office of Youth Affairs. You
Either
get to
of you
play
have
around with
found?
stuff. And go, well, I'm the other person, what would I know?
You don't understand?
No.
Yes, I have found, I have.
Just me.
With a cold.
Oh, this is on, by the way.
So tell us the details of your cold.
It's to do with the dramatic change in climate that New Zealand has experienced in the last 2 weeks. It went from 24 to about 17 degrees in the period of 2 days. And everybody suddenly got colds.
Sounds like Melbourne.
Right.
Sounds like Melbourne every day.
Yeah, well,
we go up and down within a day.
Yeah, fly down from Queensland.
Whatever it was this morning, it'll be half that by the afternoon, and then it'll be snowing at night time and be boiling all through the night. So.
Oh, well, come on, where's the snow? Come on.
we don't get it exactly in the city. Ballarat will cop it pretty hard.
Yeah.
I'll freeze and then I'll be boiling again.
Mm.
Melbourne's just a bit crazy with weather.
Wow, that was just crazy.
Just a man. Well, yeah, weather takes on the patterns of its inhabitants, really. We're all a bit neurotic down here.
This is quite intimidating standing here, isn't it?
I don't like it at all. I don't like the barrier.
This is obviously This is obviously the walkabout one.
I wondered if but they actually have the video camera they're going to, and I wondered if they were recording it, because they're live, they're streaming it all.
The only way to see the team could get my photo on the conference website was to actually fly up to Queensland and interview me for something. That's the only reason my photo's up on the website.
Was he coming to interview you anyway? Like to say, right. There you go. I really don't like having gaps on my website. I think I'll have to just fly to Queensland. Wouldn't put it past it.
No, in Viagra. Oh, you mean a millionaire? It always made me laugh when I looked at some from Robert H. They kept telling me the two beginnings. Don't grow it. Very big. Old Ryman got 2 rows there. That's right. You don't actually need to lose. Non-legalised narcotics the Mongol Westie. Seems like that girl. Oh, we rented a house for a very short time, Vintage Drive, in eDemocracy. No, you've got to wait to be introduced to it. So close. I'm not sure how to stick back. That last presenter didn't look at the phone card. Yeah. Our universities run a lot better than you.
Hi, you are Kerrie. Excellent. Now you are from Office of Youth Affairs, and I'll just get out your. Now, are you associated with Michael Hogan's group?
Well, we work for the state government.
Oh yes, yeah, no. I was just wondering whether it was
a different department. We actually eDemocracy agenda or something.
Oh right.
Yeah, it's certainly the last 3 years. Cabinet.
Right. Youth Affairs, Department of Employment and Training. Okay, I'll see if I can hand it. Oh, excellent. Now, I'd better see. We've got another. Okay. So you're happy with the order? The order and the format seems to be taken up and. Okay, I shall. Okay, I think we'll try to get started on time with the aim of finishing on time as well. And I'd ask the presenters to please stick to the 20 minutes, and I shall indicate if you are running away. I know I've been a paper presenter myself, and the enthusiasm can really carry you along, which is excellent. But we need to make concessions to time. The first speaker today is Kerrie Oakes, who is from the Office of Youth Affairs and the Department of Employment and Training in Queensland. Seem to have had a Queensland flavour. I too am visiting from Queensland. We seem to have brought the warm weather with us as well. And she is going to be talking about the impact of electronic governance on the public sector. So I'll turn over to you.
Thanks, Pat. Yep, I'm not quite sure I'm comfortable standing behind here, but I've been told I should, so I will. Also, I'll have to rush through the first couple of parts of my presentation because in fact it's the last part that I really want to talk about most. I have been working for about 2.5 years with the Office of Youth Affairs. I'm actually known as a recycled Youth Affairs officer because about 15 years ago I used to work for the office as a regional youth officer. And I must say that the changes I've seen in the 15 years are quite good because 15 years ago, for me to even have mentioned the words young people, participation and government in the same forum would have meant that I'd have been crucified. I can do it now and actually get away with it, so that's good. I work on the Generate Youth website. Our web manager Damien is also here, and some of you may have been to a presentation he did earlier today. I'm not a researcher. I'm not a scholar. I never studied political science, but I'm a practitioner. I got my first computer about 15 years ago, and I was so scared of the thing that I wasn't quite game to open the box. I also think that it's quite amusing that I now work on a website, and what's more, an interactive website which does more than just have information sitting up there. What I want to talk to you about today is actually the impact, like eDemocracy, eGovernance, e-commerce, e-everything. And I sort of think, well, gee, E is such a powerful letter. It's done all this stuff, and what I want to particularly focus on is what is the impact of E, or putting E in front of everyday business, for the public servant sitting at their desk with a computer in their office. And it's pretty big. My paper is structured around 3 particular arenas. And I want to acknowledge here up front the contribution has been made to the paper by a colleague of mine in Canada. He and I have co-authored the paper and have co-written the paper, which is quite a challenge. We've done it all via email. And I certainly want to acknowledge the contribution that he has made. The paper itself focuses on what the literature says, what practitioners have said, and finally what we in our Office of Youth Affairs Generate website have done. So that's all that bit. Basically the premise for my presentation is that culture change is something that is required. Why is it required? Because the impact of e-governance has to be considered in the context of the environment and the organisation within which it happens. Adopting technology actually changes the culture. In particular, there are 3 steps. There's a step of familiarisation, becoming familiar with this thing called a computer, this thing called the internet, this funny little thing called a mouse, which I always thought had a tail at the back end, not the front end. Adopting the tools. And finally, actually collaborating online using every day. First of all, there are a number of themes that I've found have run through the literature, ran through discussions that I had over a 3-month period with a group of eDemocracy practitioners in an online discussion group, and in the practice of what we've done in the Office of Youth Affairs. I was going to do some really great stuff and go, the literature said about bit knowledge, blah blah, here's what the literature said. 1 sentence type thing. Knowledge from the literature I picked up is how knowledge is created, shared and used in policy deliberation. Accountability, the second theme, is about openness, credit and responsibility. Centricity, responding to the needs of the user as citizen. Remodelling, which is about the changes in the public sector. And the fact that the back office and what the public servant sitting at their desk does is becoming increasingly complex, but also more hidden from citizens. They don't necessarily know or care what I do every day and how many of me there are sitting in the Queensland Government. They just want to know that I can give them what they need when they need it. And democracy being a strong link between e-governance and eDemocracy. As I said at the outset, I'm not a scholar. I haven't really examined the concepts and the terms, and I apologise to those who do that. It's a fascinating thing and I would love to do it, but maybe my definitions are a bit off from what the literature really says. So what did the practitioners say about these themes? For them, and this was a group of about 20 eDemocracy practitioners from the UK, China, Japan, Canada, the US and Germany. We were all participants in a course on learning how to e-moderate. Quite interesting to actually do it all online and to have those conversations running over a 3-month period. But generally they said knowledge was about skills, processes and decisions. They said that accountability was about roles, skills again, and results. Maybe the skills thing is because we're all doing a course and we're all learning something, but it came out. Centricity was actually about expectations and reality. What does the user expect? What do they get? What does the public servant expect? What do they get? What does government expect? What do they get? Remodelling was about the changing skill requirements for public officials. What were the new types of skills? What things did they need to learn? And I love this quote, so that's why I've used it and borrowed it from one of my colleagues. This eDemocracy thing. Can you say it enables a better democracy than that funny paper in box thing? So now to the real guts of what I want to talk about, which is probably my second love. I've got to take my children as my first love. They'd get cross at me if I didn't. The Generate Youth website. Basically, Generate is an interactive engagement tool for allowing government to respond to young people in Queensland. The age group we talk about is 15 to 25-year-olds. And largely there's a section on the site called Have Your Say. And I'd encourage you to log on and have a look at it at some stage. I'm happy to talk about that more independently with people. I don't have time today. As far as statistics go, for those who love statistics, I get to look at them all. Don't mean much to me, but I get to report on them as well, so they have to mean something. In the last 6 months of last year, we had 113,080 unique user sessions for the 6 months, which is pretty good. And that's been a sustained increase over the last 2.5 years. We have regular email newsletters, and currently we've got over 1,700 people receiving those newsletters. Our target users. This is where I go into the funny mummy story. I've got 2 kids, and one would think that because I spend a lot of my life trying to encourage young people to engage and participate in government, that my kids would be rabid participators. I've got an 18-year-old daughter who's much more interested in the fact that she's just found her senior formal dress, and Mum, can I have $500 to pay for it? I have a 10-year-old son who gets really angry with me because he can't use. I won't let him use the site because I think that there are some things that he should do. My son, what did he do? He wrote his first letter to a politician when he was 3. He led his first protest when he was 4, and he was suspended from school when he was 5. I don't want him to use the site just yet. But that's what our users are like. They're quite different. Young people 15 to 25. But what we do know about them, 3 in 5, or 60% of young people under the age of 18, and 78% of young people between the ages of 12 and 17 particularly, go online. We know that young people are internet savvy. They've been online for 5 or more years. The internet savvy young people are technologically literate. They maintain multiple email addresses. I have trouble with one. They instant message. They research, print, email, chat, browse, download music, prepare presentations, all at the same time, and they talk on their mobile phones, and usually have another phone or something hanging around as well. And they're not afraid of the technology, which for me, going back 15 years, not even being going to open the box is a big thing. Like, you know, it's just stuff to them, to the internet savvy ones. And some of those who are the heaviest users are online for several hours a day. As far as the internet and politics, probably one of the things that is still a subject of ongoing research is about young people and political participation, and young people are apathetic. Well, yeah, they don't like to vote, they don't necessarily join political parties, but they do get news about elections online. They do find that the online information is perhaps more influential for their decisions and their ideas than print media. They do play critical roles in shaping policies, programs and services, and traditionally always have done. They just might not use what is traditionally accepted as political active behaviour today. What they do want, our research tells us, is that they want high quality online information. They want policymakers to understand the differences between young people. They don't want to be young people. They want to be different types of young people. And they want to get information about public policy issues. So what have we done in terms of the theme areas? Knowledge management. What we've done is developed internal processes. Now, I'm not going to say that it's perfect. It doesn't work 100% of the time. but it has changed the way that I do my work every day, sitting at my desk. We've had to establish and document all the processes related to every aspect of our site. We've had to have record keeping and content management processes and document them. For example, I answer all the email questions that come through the site, and I have a log and a record of every question that comes in and how long it's taken to answer it, who asked it and who I asked to answer it for me. I've had to work across government to produce the content, and I have to negotiate with content owners. We've developed a decision-making guide for how do we decide what goes on the site anyway. And we've had to develop clear roles and responsibilities for the different groups of people associated with the site, as well as the ongoing research. So just for an example, what we've had to develop is a content decision-making guide, which is basically a risk management manual. What goes on the site? How do you decide what goes on the site, and where do you record your decision about what goes on the site? It's really useful when our Premier says, oh, you've got something on the site, I'm not sure I like it, why is it there? How did you decide to put it there? Well, Premier, this is the process we use. We've got an operating manual which has been approved because our site actually operates outside our standard operating environment with the authorisation of our Director General. We had to develop that in consultation with our colleagues in our department to go, hey guys, we actually want to do something a bit different to what you guys do. How do we go about getting that to work? Part of that relates to the accountability of the site. We've had to be accountable to our users and accountable to government. So in terms of accountability to users, we've developed disclaimers and all the legal paraphernalia that goes with a site, including specifically one for people who are 15 and under. Our site targets 15 to 25-year-olds, but I can't stop a 10-year-old getting on the site, except for my own son, because I control his internet access. So we've had to particularly put a disclaimer up, and we had to develop that with our legal guys to go, what should we be saying about that? We've had to continually review the site. Young people have told us we want site content that's updated regularly, so we've had to review it regularly and make sure the content is still relevant and still current, or replace it. We've also had to identify processes for how we will actually respond to issues that young people raise. This started out, first of all, because I do a report to our Cabinet every 6 months on the issues that young people raise through the site. And at first it was just, well, here are the issues. List, 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 list. The Cabinet said, well, yeah, that's fine, but what have you done about those issues? Oh, okay, well, this is what we did. Like, this issue went to that department, this issue went to that department. We responded to those questions. And fortunately, our Cabinet was operating in a context, and they said, yeah, that's good, but what happened because young people raised those issues? And that's meant that we've had to work across government with all our other government departments and go, we're going to send you the issues, you're going to do something with them, and you're going to tell us what we've done with it so that we can tell government and young people. So we actually try, and it's probably one of the areas that is the most effort, try to say to your department, if you've listed something on Generate, we will come back to you at the close of your consultation and ask for a report that will be posted on our site. And we want to know what you've done and what's changed. If nothing has changed, we want you to have a good, credible reason for why. We've also got things like election commitments, budgets, and all those normal things that we also have to follow. As far as centricity goes, for me it's just about keeping my head above the water, mainly because young people probably use the technology and know the limits and the boundaries and what you can do with it better than I do. And that's meant we've had to also teach our colleagues. I have a network of government contact officers. Each department in Queensland has nominated an officer in their department who I liaise with regularly. They help me answer all the email questions. They help us promote the site within their department. When we have an online chat with a minister, I let them know so that they can help me find out what issues might be important for their minister or might be new policy directions to think about. And they're the ones who help me write the report to Cabinet. They're the ones who I go to and who get named as so-and-so I consulted with in terms of developing this report. And I've had to, and with Damon's help, we've had to actually teach them how the site works. So we've had to develop up a handbook for our contact officers and run an induction program with them. Unfortunately, that most departments have taken it on board quite well. To the extent now where I've got some departments where the nominated contact officer has emailed me and said, I'm going on leave for the next 3 months and here's the person who's taking over Generate for me. Which has been a real bonus because I haven't had to go out and try and recruit another person from departments. But it's still about keeping heads above water. We've got to keep up with the research. We've got to know what government's about. We've got to know about democracy. We've got to know what the policies are. We've got to know what young people are like. We've got to know what the internet's like. We've got to know how the technology works. I knew none of that before I started 2.5 years ago. But those are the sorts of things that we have to keep up with so that we can keep up with what our young people are already able to do. In terms of remodelling, somebody has talked to me about vertical and horizontal government. So we've had to learn how to manage upwards. We're just about to go into our next version of Generate where we're wanting to do some stuff which I had trouble understanding at first, and we've had to teach all the way up our department to get approval to go ahead with this. This is what this means. This is what it might look like. And no, we don't quite know 100% how it's going to work, but, you know, we think it'll work. And if it doesn't, well, that's okay because we can do this and we can do that instead. So we've had to teach up. We've also had to work across government, so my network of government officers. And that's probably the reality. You know, the literature says, oh, remodel government. What does that actually mean to me? What it means to me is I actually have to know people in every department in Queensland. I also have to know people in local government and I have to know people in federal government. Because as far as young people are concerned, they don't really know which level of government necessarily deals with which particular issue. So I now have contacts in local governments and in federal government as well. So an issue comes in about immigration, and that's always one of the funny ones. Who does what? Immigration comes in and I can work across levels of government to find out an answer for those young people. It helps that I've had a minister who has said, your benchmark for, we said to him, we want to have a benchmark, like websites are meant to be responsive to issues, to what young people think. That when they put in an issue, they want us to respond to them. And so we put up, look, you know, we reckon it'd be great if we could get a response and a finalisation of an issue or a question within 2 weeks. And the minister's response to that was, yeah, okay, but wouldn't a week be better? Yes, Minister, a week would be lovely. But reality is that 2 weeks is a push. So we've built in a stage process of all emails are responded to within 24 hours. Wherever possible, if there's an existing policy response, that goes out within 48 hours. If it's something more complex, we aim for 2 weeks. Throughout that whole process of those benchmarks, I'm in constant contact with those young people who've asked that question. So I actually have ongoing email conversations with young people about their issue. Sometimes it's about clarifying something, or it's about, hey, look, this is actually, and that's part of my education role for young people, this is actually a really complex issue. It's a really important issue, and I'm going to need to get 3 other departments involved in responding. That's going to take me some time, and I will send you what I can as I can. And so far, all the young people I've dealt with have been quite okay about that. What they haven't been okay about is if I haven't told them that. Once they know, that's okay. I always ask up front with a lot of them, you get to pick. This is a school assignment. What's your time frame? Do you need to have an answer to this within a certain period of time? In which case I will shoot you a whole list of websites where you can find some more information about it. And then get you more response further down the track. And that's also then leading on to the whole idea of closing the loop and having a two-way dialogue with our users. And actually coming from the point of view that young people are citizens now. Young people, when they ask a question, are usually serious about their question. They do want an answer. When they raise an issue, it's an issue that's important to them. It may not be important to me, and that's an ongoing challenge for us, because it also may not be an issue that's actually important to the government of the day. And that's something that we deal with and we struggle with constantly. When young people raise an issue, how far can we go? You know, we can't make promises that all issues will be dealt with positively. What can we do? How far can we go? And as I say, we don't get it right all the time, but we keep trying. And that sort of leads to the future, and I'm sure that Damien and I would be happy to talk about Generate version 3 anytime anybody wants to talk to us about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kerrie. I just need to ask. Okay, our next speaker is Andy Williamson from Central Queensland University. So.
I love him.
Kia ora tātou. Good afternoon. Does say Central Queensland, but I'm also Director of Unitex Centre for IT Research in New Zealand, and the research I'm going to talk about today, or the project I'm going to talk about today, whilst it's generic, is actually grounded in some community practice in regional communities in New Zealand. I want to talk today about not what eDemocracy is, because I think that would occupy us for an awfully long time. What I want to talk about this afternoon is how do we actually prepare ourselves, and not prepare ourselves as people sitting in an office somewhere in the centre of government, but how do we prepare ourselves as citizens, people who want to become involved in government for whatever reason. And just positioning this as a model, we're seeing evidence both in practice and in research that participation in the democratic process is failing. We're also seeing some evidence that there are opportunities for people to engage more easily. But unfortunately, at the same time, government is becoming much more technical and technocratic, and in doing that becomes more inward-looking and relying not only on itself, but on its highly paid consultants to provide common sense, in inverted commas, and expertise that might at one time have been consulted out into the community. We're seeing technology become more prevalent. That's actually part of the problem. It does offer us engaged citizens at a very participation level. And it offers also a tool for communities to take their own views when they're not being listened to and promote them. And there's some real potential there, but technology is not ubiquitous. There are barriers to access, and there are major inequities that exist in the access, usage, uptake of technology. We hear a lot of people proudly quoting that they have 40 or 60% internet usage in their community. But that means you have either 60 or 40% of people who don't have it. Let's focus on that. How do we get over that barrier? And there is no such thing as a digital divide. The divide is not digital. The divide is educational, socio-economic. It's merely manifested in the barrier to access the digital technology. We have to remove the other barriers, not just focus on the digital as an excuse for people not being involved. So, how do I solve the problems of the world in 15 minutes with a cold? For a long time, I've been involved in technology. I've had 20 years' experience as an IT consultant. What I do is strategic application of technology. I'm interested in how technology interacts and relates to people and organisations. It doesn't matter if I do that at a corporate level with a multinational or a bank, with a government department or with a community. Actually, the fundamental issues are the same. It's grounded in the theory and practice of the literature, of the people, of the community, of the organisation, of the problem that you're trying to solve. Technology is simply a tool to solve a problem, nothing more. One of the problems with putting an E in front of everything is it elevates technology to some kind of dais that it doesn't deserve to be on. It is simply a tool. The model that I want to talk about this afternoon, I want to keep high level and keep it very temporal and spatial. And the reason that I want to do that is I think that we also get into, with technology, a tyranny of best practice. We get into, you must do it like Queensland because Queensland's really good at eDemocracy. Well, yes it is. As a government, as a state government in Australia, it doesn't mean that that model will work for a national government in Eastern Europe. It doesn't mean that that model will work for a regional government in regional New Zealand. It means there are probably some good ideas there that we can take and learn from, but we don't really want to get into the tyranny of best practice. It's actually crippled a lot of businesses by taking on the big CRM systems in terms of best practice because you lose competitive advantage. And in the community, competitive advantage is simply what makes you unique. It's what makes you special. We also suffer from the fact that when you're working at a community level, and this is true, I think, of participants in the community and bureaucrats and elected officials, we often lose the big picture. We focus on issues, very much driven by issues, community politics in particular, and I mean by community, local, council, city politics, not the big national stuff, right down at grassroots. It's usually more interested in dogs crapping on pavements than whether the inflation rate is going up or down. It's more interested in fluoride in the water than the exchange rate. It's about the real issues that affect your everyday life. And because of that, we tend to lose sight of the big picture. And the big picture is, how do we link all of this together to achieve a resolution? So we're all different. We all have different requirements. And the motivations for adopting anything, whether it's technology or a new bylaw or building a school or building a sports centre, will be different for each community. And each community has things that it's good at. It has skills and resources inherent in that community that are probably unique. And the uniqueness is often in the combination. It also has gaps. And identifying the gaps and bringing in that expertise is also critically important. So, stopping being a practitioner for a while and starting to be a researcher and an academic, which is a terrifying concept, I figured that what was needed was some kind of way of drawing out the big picture, not to solve the problems of the world or even of the local community, but to provide a roadmap and some key milestones that you as people who are participants in the process, and we all are, if we live in an area we are participants hopefully in that process, can actually see and feel and touch and relate to and measure. And you can measure it in two ways. You can measure it in terms of lack, or you can measure it in terms of maturity when it's happening. And so hopefully such a model will be of some use to practitioners. It will also be useful to researchers because we have to keep ourselves busy as well. And it pays, being a researcher pays me to be a community activist as well. And hopefully it's useful for policymakers. My role in eDemocracy is interesting because although I do this as a consulting business and I do this as a researcher, my true passion is as a community activist. My true passion is actually to see eDemocracy work from the ground up. And I think it's very important to make something work from the ground up that you actually can engage the people that make policy. It's not just enough to put salt in the petrol tank of the digger before it chops down the trees. You actually need to get in there and influence the policymakers and the politicians so there is no issue of the digger going anywhere near it. Salt or sugar? Sugar in the petrol tank, isn't it? Proves I've never done it, honest officer. So the model for me is about taking control of what's going on in your community as a citizen. And that's not a process of change. Change would be retaining the top-down approach. so that you elect people every 3 or however many years, and they then carry on to do as they please, and occasionally you read about it in the newspaper, if the newspaper bothers to print it. Transformation is about changing the way we engage with government. Transformation is about putting that model on its head and looking at how we do it bottom up. How do we actually take control as citizens? And to do that, there are a number of key stages that we have to go through. As an individual, as a community, as a group of communities that makes up a rural or metropolitan area, and above that you can aggregate it out as far as you like. This model is totally open to being switched around and open to scrutiny. It ends up this way in my picture because it works in the practice that I'm involved in. So again, I don't say this is, I've said the tyranny of best practice. This needs to be qualified in the environment. But very simply, 5 stages. The first 2, access and literacy, talks about building the foundation of the media and literacy skills that are, the technology availability, the skills that are needed to make this happen. Without those, you have nothing. It's then about having content. Once you've got a computer, wherever it is, a library, a home, an office, a marae, who knows, wherever's appropriate for you to access the technology affordably, and you know how to use it, there must be something to do. You must perceive value in using that product. Ultimately, you will perceive that there is a value in creating your own product. And creating your own product is taking control of your own views and opinions and getting them out there. So you get to counter the discourse in the local council that says we should chop down all the trees and build more houses when you know your community doesn't agree with it. Logically, these models are all running in parallel across different communities and in different ways. Obviously, someone has got to have got to stage 4 to create content before others have stage 3, the content to read. So these models can all happen in parallel at different phases and different stages of maturity. And not all these stages are appropriate to every community, and I'll come on to that. Finally, as you start building momentum and some scale in this whole project, there comes the issue of overload of information. And information is not created equally. Rupert Murdoch will tell you that. So we need to then think perhaps, well, how do we make this available appropriately to people in a wider community? How do we disseminate that either horizontally in terms of subject, environment, regulations, council bylaws, community news, or vertically in terms of by area perhaps? And that comes into a dissemination phase. So what they can do is codify the content that exists to make it more accessible and codify the relevant content. So the aim of the model is to look at the transition from a low or no ICT usage community into a community or group of communities that can become effective users. And by effective use, I use Michael Gerstein's definition of the capacity and opportunity to successfully integrate ICT into the accomplishment of self or collaboratively defined goals. In other words, it becomes part of what you do. And that's important because often technology is a barrier to what you do. I sat down at the airport yesterday to wait for 2 hours for the plane and switched on my laptop to work on something that I was doing, and Word crashed. And I had this idea and I was thinking I desperately want to type this, so I restarted Word, and Word crashed. So the third time it crashed, I turned off the computer and I restarted it. 10 minutes later, I'd forgotten what it was that I turned on the computer to do. That's a barrier. Okay? That's a very small micro barrier to technology. But when we talk about using technology to engage citizens, if 60% of your citizens have access to the internet, then you've disenfranchised 40% of them in one go, regardless of who they are. You just told them they were worthless. So there are many barriers. So I'm looking at a long-term model to lead us from an as-is position, which might be low or no ICT usage, and in some places it might be where there's quite effective usage, but we can still do more, to a where to. And one of the uses there is, first of all, you do want to measure where you are now. You want to measure your position on some kind of scale of maturity. Because if you don't know where you are, then it doesn't really matter where you're going. And then we can target the gaps and identify the gaps in terms of moving along a scale of maturity and identify strategies, policy, or real operational projects that can fill those gaps. I'm not allowed to say close the gaps, being a New Zealander. It's too politically loaded. So, the rationale behind this is that policymakers in particular, and I think this is a key policy issue, because unless it's driven by policy, I don't think it happens. And one of the big flaws in community technology is the word community, and that institutions of government don't recognise their role and their power in solving those issues, and leave it to communities in a very market-driven, laissez-faire approach to solve the problems and become empowered, which is all very well-meaning and politically correct and high and mighty, but it doesn't work, because individual communities don't have the skills, the voice, the power, the money, the time to do this. It's driven, in many cases at a community level, on goodwill and the smell of a not very oily rag. And it's driven initially by people who are passionate about doing something. And the problem with people who are passionate is once it's happened, they get bored and move on. So often you come across community technology projects that have no sustenance, because the net leader, the person, the visionary out there making it happen, has been there, done it, made it happen and moved on to the next thing, and there's no plan B. There's no succession planning. So the community-driven approach is great, but trying to connect it at a higher level is really useful, because you need to look at funding options for literacy programs, content programs, and macro solutions that can engage all of the community and support communities to develop mature models. And you need to look at where the equity issues are and adoption theory. Why would you use the internet? Why would you use a computer? Why would you use a pen and paper? Why would you come along to council and argue the point in this debate? In Waitakere City, where I live, I just got the figures for consultation. And the figures for consultation for our annual plan process have shown that submissions to the annual plan process have effectively doubled year on year for the last 4 years. Now, we have a decline in participation in general civic affairs, yet this participation is increasing. Why? Anecdotally, it's probably issue-driven, and it's still very low. But also it's being increased because there are more channels to communicate. In the past, you had to turn up and have your say. Then you could write in. Now you can email in or submit on a web form. It's easier to participate if you have access. But we need to be motivated, and we need to look at phased maturity as well. It's not just going in and trying to do it all singing or dancing on day one. We need to actually build patterns and develop the maturity so that the whole system of technology in the process actually develops usefully and can be sustained. And the projects must be measured. They need to be measurable in terms of the community development criteria. What does the community want out of it? They need to be measured against community technology frameworks. Is this a good and effective use of technology? Is this a new and innovative use of technology we should pass on? Or are you making the same mistakes that people over there have already learnt? The best use of case studies and supposed best practice is actually to learn from other people's mistakes. There are an awful lot of people around the world creating ICT solutions with square wheels. And there are some very good round wheels. And we need to look at the round wheels and figure out why they roll and learn from them. Not just copy them, but see what's good about it. Also, my personal belief, as someone with a background in project management, is that we need to be able to manage these projects and systems of community engagement in terms of a rationale and a project management process. We need to be able to see that they are an effective use of limited, often voluntary resources in a community, so that we're not detracting from the things that matter. Remember, technology doesn't matter, it's just a tool. we don't want to be taking everybody away from the real issues. The big issue where I live at the moment for us, and has been for 10 years, is the environment. It's the protection of the regional park that I live in. Now, I don't want to spend all my time developing websites and doing this and going out and telling people how wonderful technology is while some bastard goes and chops down all the trees. And that's actually what it does. We've got really limited time to engage in what we feel passionately about. This should support it, not take away from that time. But the main value of being measurable is that funders can gauge the effectiveness of a project. Funders love quantitative statistics that tell you how many people visited the site and contributed to it and engaged on it. As a qualitative researcher, I just can't fathom it. But they love it. They like to see tables, they like to see numbers, they like to see things that make them feel good. And hey, they're the ones with the money. And to do this as a community, I need to get money. I can't do it myself. So I have to look at measurable outcomes that funders want. I have to actually at least whistle the tune that the piper wants me to play, even if I don't like the words. Practitioners can identify what works. Well, that's really important because we do want to replicate it. Policymakers can build on success and learn from failure. And I've really seen that. The Queensland examples are great. The Queensland government has really been through a very good process of developing and learning. And yes, there are flaws in what they're doing, and yes, there are problems. And personally, I don't believe that government can do democracy. I think we do democracy, they do government. But at least they're trying. And they don't have to get it right first time. None of us will. So where does that leave us? Often it leaves us with a perception of what we can do and our own limitations stopping us doing it. What I hope this model will do is provide a roadmap that takes us through the various stages, and I think in about 1 minute, so that access looks at not the lack of access being the issue, but the consequences of that lack of connection. When it looks at literacy, we look at how everybody in the community is able to be trained and engaged in effective use of ICT so that they can do what they want to do. Not what we want them to do, what they want to do. So that content is useful and relevant and people are motivated and communities have the skills and the capacity to create their own knowledge and distribute it. And finally, as we reach a critical mass of that local information, that communities or macro communities can aggregate that information and codify it in a way that when you want to know something, you can find it. And you're not reliant on the political bias of your local newspaper editor who's got a thing in for the mayor and wants him out of office to run stories that are totally biased. And the only way you can communicate is your letter to the editor if you're lucky. This is a way of getting the community voice lifted up above the whole clamour of everything else. Does it work? Well, sometimes. But at least it's a model that we can come back to and look at. Okay, I think I'm out of time, so thank you very much.
Thank you. The timekeeping has been absolutely exemplary, which I really appreciate. And I want to remind you that, of course, this means we'll have time for questions at the end. We're going to take questions for all three speakers at the end rather than have them at each one. So if you can make notes of questions you'd like to ask, and then I'll be calling for them after Lionel Pearce's presentation. And he is also from CQU, Central Queensland University, as a kind of Queensland invasion that has been organised. I don't think we're taking over exactly, but over to you, Lionel. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Pat. Thank you very much. That's my very large presentation's warming up. I'd like to say thank you to the organisers of this conference and to the participants like yourselves for showing up, but the organisers in particular for inviting me to come along and talk to you today. My theme, or my talk today, is about managing e-governance initiatives, a phased approach with performance measures. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I'll just introduce myself. I am Lionel Pearce. I'm a lecturer in management in the Faculty of Business and Law at Central Queensland University. The reason for considering management of electronic governance initiatives is principally due to mitigating the considerable risks involved in such programs. One of these risks is that
Rupert is watching. This is from the Australian of, I believe, 16th of March this year. Also from that wonderful paper, we have this, Federal Websites Found Wanting, which was the journalist's take on it, and showed me that there was an article that I should be reading, which was a report from the Australian National Audit Office. The Australian National Audit Office report, which was published this year, came to a number of conclusions after it had formally looked at a number of federal websites. Now, some of these websites that were considered by the Audit Office are actually considered by many observers to be landmark websites of their genre. However, the Audit Office recommendations were, firstly, that federal agencies should implement appropriate policies for monitoring and evaluating internet services, that they should define objectives for websites and portals, that they should also conduct research to reveal the access to the site by different classes of users and the needs of those users and the benefits they gain or expect to gain from access to that website, and that they should also develop business cases and clear objectives for services. And I looked at those. I lecture in management, so I'm a little bit one-eyed. Well, I used to be a New Zealander as well, that helps. I looked at those, and in other words, I came to the conclusion that somebody was saying, in fact, that federal agencies should apply management principles to electronic government initiatives. And I thought, what a bloody good idea. So, before we get into what those management principles should be, let us just remind ourselves of those principles in terms of the functions of management, which I will remind you are planning. And planning is a phase in which goals or targets are established and decisions made on how to achieve those goals. We also organise. We organise resources necessary to carry out the actions that we've pre-planned for achieving the goals, and we procure those resources and we organise them. We also lead. Well, some people lead. And leading is where direction is established for the process and motivation is provided to stimulate activity. And finally, the most overlooked function of management at all is control. And controlling provides both the regulation of the activities as well as the means of measuring progress towards the goals that we establish in the planning stage. Okay? So at the moment we've got something which looks like it may be slightly dysfunctional. But is there a management model appropriate to electronic governance? Well, we can find out. And one of the ways to find out, and something that I started, I began this research, by the way, 2 years ago, on All Fool's Day. Yeah, I remember it well. I wanted to find out, and the reason to, I'll give you the reasons later, but obviously it's something to do with mitigating risk. I examined history. I looked at current thinking on the subject. I started assessing the shortcomings of what that current thinking may be, and from those shortcomings synthesised a new solution. And I'd like you just to bear with me for the next 15 minutes or so whilst I talk about this research journey. Before we begin, and I have my own definitions here, and they are my own. They're a shorthand way of looking at and determining the difference between electronic government and electronic governance. Basically, electronic government is using ICTs as another channel between government and citizens, businesses and other governments for delivery of information, transactions and services. In other words, what we're saying here is it is maintaining the public administration status quo, but adding a virtual technology layer over the top. Okay? To differentiate from electronic governance is transforming public administration using enabling ICTs to enhance relationships between government and the community and to provide governance more suited to the information age. As the public administration is capable of becoming more informated, so are its communities.
In fact, it is unclear, and I'm going to pick up on Andy's point here, as to whether the drivers for electronic governance are coming from within government themselves or from their citizenry. But that's an issue I'm not going down that track today. Electronic governance, by its definition, requires change. And I think we'll all admit that managing change is difficult. Innovation is a special form of change. It involves not only doing something that is different, but adding something new that has never been attempted before within that organisation. Change that involves innovation brings with it an exponential increase in risk. However, and this is the raison d'etre of my research, management of change is a means of mitigating those risks. Many of you will have heard of the stages of growth model, okay? Normally ascribed to one Richard L. Nolan. You all heard of that? Heard of it? Okay. Stages of growth model is, as I say, has not only got Nolan's tag on it. In actual fact, just as an aside, it was developed by some people called Churchill and Kempster and others about 5 years before Nolan, but Nolan it was who made it famous. It appears that with each new generation of information and communications technologies advancements, the stages of growth model is proposed as an applicable means to manage their introduction. And this was true in 1979 when database technologies were introduced. Many of you will not remember that. It was also true in 1988 when end-user computing was introduced. And one of the papers on that was written by Sid Huff, who now runs information at Victoria Uni Wellington. And it also was true when enterprise resource planning was introduced, and one example of that is a paper by Holland and Light written in 2001. Also, it was true when electronic government became popular. And two papers which I'm going to look at, the first by Lane and Lee in 2001 and the second by Moon in 2002. So these people have adopted the stages of growth model as a means by which electronic government should be introduced. Let me look at the Lane and Lee model first. The Lane and Lee model is measured on 2 dimensions. On the y-axis we have the technical and organisational complexity, and on the x-axis we have the level of integration. We start from simple complexity up to complex complexity, and we go from sparse to complete. The Lane and Lee model works like this. It has 4 stages. The first stage is cataloguing. And cataloguing consists of government having a web presence that enables information to be imparted to those who want it. Okay? Very simple, very straightforward. Most government agencies are at that level, or beyond it. The second level is transactional, and this is where citizens and businesses are able to pay for licenses, pay taxes, pay fines, etc., etc. Yeah, all the things we really want to do. We really want to pay our taxes online, don't we? I mean, yeah. It's okay getting the rebate, but yeah. The third level is vertical integration. Remember, this is Lane and Lee's model of 2001. The third level is called vertical integration, and this is where agencies at all levels, be they local, state or federal, who are delivering services of a similar kind or to a certain target citizenry, cooperate to achieve a seamless means by which citizens derive those services. And the final one, I think you've probably guessed, is horizontal integration, where the stovepipe character of government functions is breached that way, such that there is horizontal integration and true seamlessness and transparency of government. Pipe dream, maybe. Note that the Lane and Lee model does not progress into the realms of civic engagement, political activities, or electronic democracy. However, Moon's model does. Moon's model has 5 stages. This is Moon 2002. I forgot to put the reference on the slides. I do apologise. In actual fact, I made up this diagram because it doesn't appear in this text, so it's actually mine now. Moon, however, does progress into the area of political engagement. His first stage, though, is information dissemination, which cataloguing, in which information is made available using ICTs. The second stage is two-way communication, and that's the ability to swap emails and swap files. His third stage is service and financial transactions, and that's the ability to do those things that we talked about, online payment and service delivery. His fourth stage, vertical and horizontal integration, and in the fifth stage, political participation, which Moon says includes lobbying, canvassing, debating and voting. Moon's model is very detailed for the first 3 levels. In actual fact, Moon's first 3 levels are the same as Lane and Lee's first 2 levels. Okay. My criticism of the Moon model is I think it will be very ambitious to put vertical and horizontal integration together in one stage. That will be very, very difficult to manage. So I reworked the model, and I came up with these models and came up with a synthesized stages approach, which I split into 3 categories. The first one is, the first category is electronic governance commerce. And I called that electronic governance commerce because the target or the customer for that is the e-citizen. And that consists of stage 1 informational and stage 2 transactional. So we engage the citizen in information transfer and transactional transfer. The second phase is I've classified as e-governance administration because the target for these particular stages is in fact the internal administration of government. In other words, the processes of government, or the processes of public administration. And these stages are stage 3, internal integration, and stage 4, external integration. The final aspect of the model consists of the groups e-governance civic, which I say stage 5 is electronic democracy, and stage 6 is maturity. I call it maturity because I've got no other name for it, because I can't forecast where we're going to be and what it's going to look like by the time we get there. And I've deliberately put eDemocracy in as a later stage in the model, purposefully because it comprises many competing dimensions, including debate on political representation, direct or representative democracy, as well as the ubiquitous digital divide, and I'm not going there today either. There are certain advantages that accrue to using this stages of growth model, and these are that it has intuitive simplicity. I admit that Nolan's model has had its critics in the past. There are many texts criticising it, but it's still around after over 30 years. It's predictable. We know that if we're in stage 2, if we complete these tasks, we can go into stage 3. Wonderful stuff. It has functional decomposition. We have purposefully decomposed what is a mammoth task down to things and isolated them in things which are now manageable. Lovely. And it promotes organisational learning. You cannot get from stage 2 to stage 3 unless you've learned the lessons appropriate to stage 2. Doesn't make sense. But with the advantages come disadvantages. First of all, the stages of growth model, and Nolan's isn't the only one, there's about half a dozen others, but they all treat the organisation as a closed system. Whilst recognising the fact that the impetus, the drivers, the motivation for change comes from without the organisation, what happens is they internalise the formulation of the solution. So they take it internal, and so therefore external representation is not accommodated. The higher stages of the stages of growth model require application of business process re-engineering because they focused on the processes of administration, public administration. It needs to be supplemented with a performance management method because performance management method is not an integral part of the stages of growth model. and it does not support culture change. That is not accommodated in the stages of growth model. What we need, therefore, is something that does accommodate all of those things that are missing from stages of growth model. Because there are multidimensional forces. There are risks that run from local and limited through to threat to survival. There are gains that are either incremental or sustainable. There are scopes that are local to business-wide, and there are mindset changes which are required from none right through to paradigm shifts. If we put some change scenarios on here, we have process improvement. It requires only local scope, not a great deal of mindset change, has very limited risk, fairly few gains. For the next level, we introduce process re-engineering, moderate scope, moderate mindset change, moderate risk, and moderate gains. If we add to that business re-engineering, now we're getting into big league. Okay? Higher levels of gains means higher levels of risks, requires a higher level of mindset change and a greater degree of scope. But when we get up into transformation, when we're talking about government agencies adapting to the information age and transforming to be able to, we're talking business-wide scope, threat to survival, sustainability step change and paradigm shifts in mindset. I turned therefore to some model by which we could manage change. Change can be managed providing it is anticipated. One of the models that I looked at is from Waddell and others, which was only published this year. I promised Diane Waddell I would plug her book if she'd let me use this material. The first thing is motivating change. And in motivating change, we are creating techniques for change, readiness for change within the organisation and dealing with resistance to change. An important point. In the second phase of this organisation development model, we are creating a vision. This involves encouraging and energising commitment and developing a shared concept of a planned future state. We are developing political support, and this phase is crucial because from it comes the power and authority of the change agent. This power and authority is derived from the combined endorsement of all stakeholders and senior influencers. And in phase 4, managing the transition. Managing the transition is the activity where planning is conducted, resources are marshalled and organised, direction is applied and control measures used to monitor the action. In the final phase of this organisation development model, sustaining momentum. This is a means by which the change recipe becomes ingrained within the culture of the organisation. The outcome of these efforts is effective change management. Now, okay, I seem to have changed direction here. I've dropped the stages of growth model and I've moved on. That's to a generic organisation development model consisting of these 5 phases. However, I'm not going to talk about 3 of the phases. I'm going to talk 4 of them. I'm only going to talk about managing the transition. And there's a simple reason for this. The first 3 phases of this model are highly contextual. Okay? They are very much dependent upon the organisational environment prevalent at the time that the work begins. Therefore, they cannot be pre-scripted. By the time we have ended the 3rd phase, all of the factors of the organisational environment will be sufficiently well known and controlled or controllable to the extent where we can get on with implementing the managing the transition. Well, that's my theory. The advantages of organisation development is that motivation is derived from a vision. It deals with resistance to change. It establishes political support. It supports structural change. It treats organisation as open systems. It is customer process focused. It's based on organisational learning, and it establishes change as part of the culture. All features, I think, which are necessary for effective electronic governance. So, within this 4th phase of the organisational development model, we want to manage the transition. We are going to choose a techno-structural intervention technique which redesigns the core processes of the organisation, creates better coordination linkages between organisational units, and uses ICTs as enablers. It requires structural and cultural change. And the result is better workflow, quicker performance, and enhanced customer responsiveness. All, I think, which are perfectly adequate goals to aim for with electronic governance. Our 6 steps now. Cast your mind back. If you're still awake, right? You're awake? If you're still awake, remember we finished up with 6 stages in my synthesized model. Now let's consider those stages as steps. We have the informational stage, step 1, the transactional stage, step 2, the process redesign, step 3, full integration, step 4, eDemocracy, step 5, and maturity, step 6. Now, why have I considered them now as steps rather than stages? Well, the stage model takes things incrementally. You go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3 to stage 4. In this model, using them as steps, you don't progress from one step to another. You utilise the learning from a step in the next step. However, you can go backwards. Let me give you an example. For example, in step 5, electronic democracy, there will be the necessity to distribute information concerning all the democratic processes. Therefore, you are dependent upon the informational capacities which you developed in step 1. Okay, so step 1 will have to be revisited. But the important feature about this is that there is a feedback loop between all of the steps, and you're revisiting the steps and you're using the capacities of what you've learned in those steps throughout the model. I'm nearly finished. So I then decided there were 2 things missing. First of all, we needed some performance management technique, right? Because performance management is not an integral part of the organisation development model. And for this, we need to be able to establish goals, set metrics for those goals, collect data on those goals, assess performance, and make adjustments. And I wanted to be able to assess within my model, for each of those steps, I wanted to be able to assess the economic or financial aspects of that step. I wanted to be able to assess the organisational learning capabilities within that step. I then wanted to assess improvements to business processes within that step. And finally, I want to know citizen satisfaction that is derived from completion of that step. And for that, I chose the Kaplan and Norton balanced scorecard method. I also wanted to overarch, put an umbrella right over the top, and I wanted a program management capability that enables me to obtain political support, invoke consistency between projects, manage risk, and manage quality. And we put the whole lot together. It looks like this. How long have I got? 2? Lovely. Okay, we put the whole lot together. I'm sorry it looks a bit busy, but you've seen the world before, apart from the program management right at the top there. Okay. Underneath that is the 5-phase organisational model, the 4th phase of which has a balanced scorecard applied to each of those steps. Another view of the same thing is what we've done is managing the transition, the 6 steps of managing the transition has been encapsulated within a performance management technique, and is wrapped around with the whole gamut of organisation development, and the whole thing's controlled under a program management regime. Perfectly viable. Let's go back to where we started then. We started with the aspect that we were trying to address the planning, organising, leading and control functions of management. What we have with this model is the capability through organisation development, through program management and application of the balanced scorecard. In other words, the enhanced organisation development model provides us with the capacity to plan, lead, organise and control e-governance initiatives. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, now we have about 15 minutes for questions. What I get you to do is, if you can ask me the question, I have to then restate the question so that it will get on the webcast, and then I'll ask whoever you're asking the question to come up to the podium and speak. And if you might just like to wait round here so we can be easy here. So questions. Yes.
My question is for Kerrie.
Yes, a question for Kerrie. Yes.
Well, it's obviously a pretty spectacular endeavour to work across a range of departments like that. So I was wondering, obviously you had lots of top-down support, which is obviously very important. What else was in that use to make that possible? And how did you convince people in other departments who are at a program or project level that it wasn't some techno niche thing? It was actually about real outcomes that the government was after.
Okay, I'll just restate that question and correct me if I got it wrong. Aside from top-level support, what other support were you getting, and also how did you convince others that it wasn't just merely a techno escapade that the government that you were engaged in?
We did a jigsaw puzzle. Seriously, what we did, yes, we got top-down support in that we got our Director General to ask other Director Generals to nominate a person from in their department. We had the top-down of having the government community engagement agenda, e-government agenda that Queensland Government had. But what we did was emails, phone conversations. We brought all the contact officers together for a half-day induction session, and we gave them a book. So we sort of said to them, your contribution is actually important to us. We did it also subtly by things like, when we went to host the induction session, having a big welcome sign down at the bottom of our building in the foyer, welcome to the Generate contact officers, to make them feel that we did actually value their input. Ongoing relationships of ongoing emails, phone conversations, regular updates of this is what the site's doing, signing them all up for our email newsletter so that they got that information as well. So, as well as playing the jigsaw puzzle, which is about, this is what our site's about. Who uses our site? Why do they use it? And so we'd done a whole exercise, or it had happened, of, identifying who the different users were, why they used sites, and we tried to do that sort of thing. So teaching them about our site and about how they could use the site. We've had visions of getting them to be actually posting content themselves and being able to do that. We've not actually been able to carry through on that, but we get them involved. So as a contact officer, even though I might be liaising with the their minister's office about an online chat, I make sure they know that a chat's happening and they're involved in that process as well.
Thank you for that. Any next question? Yes.
Question probably for Lionel. I was wondering about the applicability of a kind of linear stage model in the real politics.
Okay.
Different government departments. Say, how do you have stage 1 initiate change without getting political support? You've got stage 3.
Yes. So the question, just to paraphrase it, is about the applicability of a linear model to the complexity of the governmental process.
Yes, thank you for the question. I spotted that, and I hadn't got time in my presentation to explain. That's why I put the program management around it. This is a model which initially was developed by CCTA in the UK for managing multiple projects consistently. It's an umbrella thing, and it actually puts the political support mechanism right at the front. It also guarantees and monitors the sustenance of that political support throughout the lifetime of the programme. Does that answer the question? Thank you.
Questions? Yes.
Yeah, for Kerrie. My question is, do you think that, given that you've actually created a website specifically for young people, do you think that may have then given undue significance to young people's access to politics that maybe other citizens don't have? Like, is this somehow elevating young people above other citizens, especially given that you're demanding that other departments give a response? Not like I get ignored when I write a letter. We've now got young people that just because they're young people, they get extra access. Is that the case?
I probably haven't really examined it to know for sure. Sorry, the question?
It may have been picked up on the webcam, but just in case it hadn't, you're asking about whether the website for children is elevating children's place in politics above others?
In terms of that, I couldn't answer 100%. Of course it does. We do have an Office for Ageing, an Office for Women. It's been regular practice in Queensland Government for some time now, a number of years, to do things like reports about women's access and things like that. It's probably at a different level, a different type of thing. You'd probably have to ask somebody else in like our Community Engagement Division that. I don't think it does, but...
Well, if it does, and supplementary question, if it does, then do you think that that's a bad thing?
I think it's a good thing in that, like, young people, particularly when you're looking at those under the age of 18, do have issues, do have interests right now that they don't want to be seen and they don't want to be turned off by, they want to have that. At the same time, one of the messages that we do give when we do talk to other departments about our youth charter and things like that, and we talk about engaging with young people, we always try to say what you do now to engage with the community elsewhere is exactly the same thing with young people. Where you might say engage with the community, if you just take out community and put young people, the principles are the same. The processes are similar. There might be a few things you do differently, like the language you use or whatever, but it's still based on respect. It's still based on, it's the same principles for other members of the community.
I have two questions here.
Yeah, my question is also for Kerrie. You gave us some nice statistics about the percentage of households with access to the internet, but we know that that's very dispersed. And households with young people in them, even in poorer households, are more likely to have internet connection than households without young people in them. But I just wondered if you had any data about the different groups that are using the service, and also what your service does to make visible to other users the lives of those different young people. So young people from poor households, for instance, a large percentage of the poor, and also a large percentage of young people living in poverty in Australia. Does your website help make visible to other young people, what the lives of them are like, which is often invisible in our society?
So again, to paraphrase, the question is about the data that's available about the different groups that are using the website, and also how effectively does that website then relay information about those groups to other people looking at the website?
We don't specifically have data that breaks down specifically group by group or region by region within Queensland. That's probably something like that. We've done some ad hoc in terms of surveys that we've done where we've tried to gather that sort of information. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. In terms of whether the site itself tries to relay the information from group to group of young people, probably one of the reasons why we are going to generate version 3, and this may help do that, is at the moment generate version 2 we have identified as quite government-centric. The issues, like, apart from young people can email us questions and young people post issues on the discussion board, apart from that, the consultations, the legislation, the online chats are largely determined by what government wants to put on, when government wants to do it. We want to actually turn that around more to young people having more opportunities to raise issues and share those issues, and that's probably part of the idea behind some of the communities of interest stuff that we're looking at going to, which Damien would be able to tell you more about, in terms of that, well, talking about what young people themselves see as issues and sharing that information, not only though with each other and with government across the board sort of thing.
Question?
Yeah, my question's for Lionel. My name's Anne Woods Lionel and I work for Centrelink. So I was just briefly wondering whether your presentation will be on our website, including the initial slide, and if so,
in the interest of the need for government accountability, I'll organise for a brief response to Murdoch's question.
I did notice, Anna, I did not specifically, I wasn't critical of that.
I know, and it's fair comment to ask the question. I thought rather than take the time now, I was wondering if you could send me on the website and then I'll organise the response.
Okay. On whose website?
The conference website.
Oh, this, I'm not sure whether the slides are going on to the conference.
I think they will be.
There. As it's published material, and I've acknowledged it, that's all I wanted to use it for. It was an icebreaker.
But I could give some broad, not in a full defensive position, but I could raise some broad information as to what it provides in terms of
in the interest of freedom of speech, Anna, I wouldn't say you couldn't have the right of reply. But talk to Rupert.
I'm sure we did.
Well, Lionel, say there.
Lionel?
I apologise to Andy, he's almost a neighbour of mine. I should have asked a question, but I haven't quite got one here. The question I had for you, Lionel, the synthesised stages approach that you talked about, there were the 6 stages, and the stage 3 was internal integration. When you put the steps on top, you changed internal integration to process redesign, which I think could have quite different interpretations. Do you want to say why you changed it?
I'll just repeat there. You changed, given the terminology again, sorry.
Synthesised stages approach, stage 3, internal integration. When he did it as steps, changed it to process redesign.
Okay, internal integration became process redesign. What was that change all about?
Okay, well, the significance of that is I had to cut the CD-ROM last Thursday. And I took that model from an older version of some slides that I'd made for my confirmation of candidature for my PhD. And it was a misnomer, and thank you for spotting it. It was supposed to, the steps were supposed to have the names of the 6 stages which I'd identified earlier. So, does that answer the question?
Yeah, I just got a wee concern that process redesign and internal integration are 2 separate things.
The first step should have been vertical integration, internal integration. The third step should be internal integration, and the 4th step, external integration.
Cool.
It's easier to integrate internally than it is to break down the walls between the stovepipes. Yeah. Sorry.
Do you have any more questions? Well, if there are no more questions, I'd like you to join me in thanking the 3 speakers. So, Kerrie, Andy, and Lionel. I believe in the foyer there is a networking session sponsored by the Victorian Local Governance Association, which you're welcome to attend.
That's great. Good. A little over my head.
I'm looking at it.
I'm writing, really, so it takes me a lot longer to catch up with a lot of stuff. I just lot and think, and then you've already moved on. It's like,
There's a lot of management theory.
Yeah, well, I look at everything. I'm interested in everything. I'm just not very talented in anything, so it takes me a lot longer.
Yes, I'm trying to transfer some funds and it keeps telling me my password's incorrect. Yeah, it's Liesl Thomas. That's right. Over the phone. Yep, 3461 1003 2474.